Welcome to the Waiting List podcast. Tell us a story.
It's like many things you start building from scratch.
And then I'm like, wait, I really do like watches because
You've seen so many watches that makes you excited.
I think I really do like watches.
Yeah. I think it's a great way to see if you are a watch enthusiast. Right, welcome to another episode of the Waiting List podcast, where I, Daniel, your host, am joined by none other than Charlie Dunne, who you can find on IG at books_on_time. Welcome to the show, Charlie.
Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome, Charlie.
Hi.
Right, I am joined as usual by the coffee-addicted Long Long and the soon-to-be coffee-addicted Jacqueline. A little background regarding Charlie. Charlie is a watch collector based out of the East Coast and works in digital marketing. And I really got to know him through Clubhouse and then later through Instagram, mainly because we both share an interest in watch books. Actually, I think that isn't just me. I think Long Long and Jacqueline also read their fair share. So let's get right into the interview. So my first question, Charlie, is could you share with us how you got into watches? Because I would say it's quite different to how the average person would have gotten into watches. And I also really appreciate the role your father played in it.
Yeah, sure. So my interests, I think, probably started in my teenage years when I was tagging along with my father antique shopping. And I found a nice book on watches called The Classic Watch. And, that was kind of my foray into, I guess, understanding different brands and kind of the styles over history. And I grew to kind of love watches through books. And kind of more recently, I think last 2 years, 3 years, I've been a little bit more serious about, finding watches to collect, I guess you could say. But I'm much more of a passionate book collector, I would say, than opposed to watch collection. I spent a little bit more in terms of money on books, which I'm sure people would think I'm crazy if they were, budgeting for their dream watch. I've kind of spent a little bit too much on books thus far.
So, we go back to your father here. Your father was taking you around these antique stores. What was his motive to do so? Was it because he didn't want you staying in the house? He was trying to get you into antiques, or a bit of both? What was it? And what was he actually into?
Yeah, my father's really passionate about antique furniture. So Victorian and Georgian chairs. He loves cutlery as well. He's just kind of an eclectic guy. He likes to go and search for antiques. And I think that he probably just dragged me along because I would have been getting up to no good unsupervised at the house. But I don't think he was really trying to pass on an interest in antiques to me. I probably couldn't be bothered and found it to be like the most boring thing on the planet. But in hindsight, it's kind of funny that I've developed this obsession with old things, such as his interest is just obsessive about random things that are 100 years old or plus 100 years old. So
when I heard your story about like your father being in antiques but not really being that much so of a watch collector and how you got into watches, I did think, my father isn't into watches, but I wish he was, because then I could have nabbed his pieces. So like it would have helped you a lot if you were actually into furniture and cutlery, because you would have just got all the good stuff straight away without much investment, right? And now you've had to start again with watches.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I like what my dad's interests are. I mean, he's got some interesting chairs and all these nifty kind of things that he's picked up over the years, and I can appreciate them. I think that I mostly enjoy kind of the stuff that he's passionate about, if he's able to just sit there and talk to me about it and describe what the wood furnishing is. And I mean, he's a really supportive father, and he's really, excited to share my interests. And so I try to reciprocate that same, passion for his antiques as he shows towards my obsession with watches. And so.
Yeah, I really wonder, just when you talk how you describe your father, and we have had other guests on that describe that relationship with their parents, and how, one recent one that comes up is Lydia Winters, how supportive her father was doing random stuff. I would say in Chinese culture, parents are very supportive as long as you're doing what they want, right? Like if it's education or it's like anything like that, or excelling in something, you get full support. I remember when I was at school, if I had wanted a new pencil case, new computer, anything to do with education, the budget was limitless. But if I wanted like a hockey stick or something like this, it would be like, hang on, you can still use the old one. Like, it's very interesting how you have that difference in cultures of how they support the children. I mean, both are supporting. There's just different angles, right?
Really, when I was growing up, every time I wanted like the newest pencil case or like the newest backpack, and I would always go to my grandpa because he would just like spoil me with everything. But then every time I go to my dad to ask for these things, and his doctrine would always be like, you know, having the newest backpack walking into an exam doesn't necessarily guarantee you an 100. But if you bring like a plastic bag and some like shorty little pencils that you've used for like, you know, almost the entire school year and get an 100, that's what's really good. Like that's what you should be aiming for, and none of the materialistic things.
Did you not hit him back with, yeah, but it's all about peace of mind?
No, I mean, I just stopped talking because I know like no matter what I say, he's not gonna buy me the thing. So I'll just go to my grandpa. Yeah.
But Charlie, I wanted to ask, with your father being in furniture and cutlery, when he ever comes back to your place, does he say that IKEA is a piece of shit?
I've inherited some good things from my father. I think that the chairs, he has a collection of chairs at one point that like exceeded 100, I'm pretty sure. And it was funny that once my stepmother, started living with us, and her children would come over. I remember distinctly, there's one point where my stepsister Maddie came inside, and she just said to me, she said, "We've counted all of the chairs." And I didn't notice that this was like abnormal for people to have so many chairs in their home. And then in hindsight, it's like, oh wow. But he's been very kind to kind of bequeath a lot of his nice furniture when I needed something to sit in around the apartment, or he's given me some really nice sentimental little like things to decorate the apartment, and that's always nice. But his tastes are a little bit different than most. I think my stepmother has one room in the entire home that she was able to decorate, and then the rest of it is just filled with old stuff.
I would say your stepmother's very open, because I would say the ladies have a very strong control of how the house looks in general. But moving on, since it is watch books is how we connected.
That's also how Charlie and I connected, by the way. Yeah. I mean, I follow Charlie like just because at the beginning, your account came up and it was like one of the suggested accounts. And I remember when was it? I think like late 2019, or might have been like early 2020. Christian was doing like a video for his channel, and then he shouted you out because you were providing him some information in the area that he was researching. And then I was like, oh yeah, already. And then I typed into your account because I was like, okay, I'm gonna follow this guy. And then I found out that I was actually following you already. So then I think like we started talking, and then you started recommending me like deals on eBay, and actually bought a few books that Charlie recommended. A Christie's catalog, some vintage, a couple of catalogs, I think, and then like some books on Patek Philippe. And then he found the watch that like the oldest watch that I own in like a old catalog or something, right?
It's a Gublin dial, correct?
And then I made a post. It's the same watch, right? I asked you, I was like, is this the same watch? And then I think it's like the same watch. So it goes back to just like, where do you trace? I mean, it's impossible to trace it back to almost 100 years ago, but then it's fun to find little like snippets during history where your like watch has popped up and breathed out of the water for you to take a look at. That was
That watch
So
is remarkable too. I mean, it's a tortue shaped, interactive case where the case is a two-tone, but then it opens up and you can actually, inspect the interior, and it's got this incredible guilloche and it's double signed. I mean, it's from the 1920s. I mean, it's just a fantastic timepiece. And, I think that that's also something that is a really cool, it speaks to somebody in terms of like the appeal of something from the 1920s. Not everybody who's into watches is going to see that and be like, that's the watch that I would love to wear. And so, yeah, I mean, I always find people, who have interesting tastes, and it's not something, oh, I need to have that watch, I'm jealous of this person's collection, etc. It's more so just like, it's fascinating to see what other people are interested in. And, it's always cool to like trace back, like, oh, where's this auction catalog? I know I saw that somewhere, and dig through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, do you remember, like, John and I, we were talking about this because we had John on our show recently.
Oh, John Reardon.
Yeah, John Reardon. And I got the watch from him. And how did I find out that he had the watch? It was from your story because you reposted it.
Yeah.
So then and then I went ahead and I contacted him. And we were talking about this like last week when we were interviewing him. It ended up being my first Patek. And I'm so happy it is. Yeah.
That's so cool. I'm happy I could have, pointed something out to you, and I'm sure it's something that, is going to be one of those timepieces that'll be just a remarkable thing to look at and appreciate it forever.
Yeah, for sure.
I think, so me and Jacqueline know you through watch books. I think, if you were into abs and stuff, I think Long Long would have reached out to you by now as well.
Yeah, right.
But or other things.
I'm not.
Amongst other things.
Keep going.
But I wanted to ask, what books would you actually recommend to read? Like for a start off, for somebody getting into it, what do you think needs to be covered, and which books do you think cover it?
I think that there's all types of books, right? So like what I'm really interested in right now is these kind of books that are really comprehensive, what I would kind of describe as like a forensic approach of looking at every single aspect of the watch and detailing like hallmarks and who's the case maker, and then, inspecting the dial and saying, is this original? I really like those very, very detail oriented books. And those come in, the form of, John Goldberger's books on Patek and Rolex. And there's also other books, like Moonwatch Only, and Eric Tortella books. And, those are really great books for somebody who's probably a little bit more obsessive about the details when it comes to vintage watches. But if somebody was to get kind of, the dip their toes in the water of like, oh, I want to actually have, some books around the house, whether it's a coffee table book or maybe something to show some friends if they come over. I mean, there are a lot of books that are kind of good for that type of, that type of genre. So maybe like a book like Gene Stone and Stephen Pulverant. They did a re-release of The Watch is what the title is. Thoroughly Revised is that one. And I was fortunate enough to meet Stephen in Miami during a book signing, and they gave us all the books for free at the Vacheron event. That was really exciting.
Wow. Yeah. He takes great photos.
Yeah, he's a fantastic guy. I really enjoyed meeting him. And then at a later point during the beginning of COVID, I'd reached out to him in request to maybe get a signed book and kind of raffle it off to a charity that's in my area. And he was just so excited and responsive. And he, in the middle of lockdown, he ended up, taking a few days afterwards and getting the book and signing it to send off to somebody. So it was a really nice, nice gesture from him. And I think that he had posted something today that he was leaving Hodinkee. So I'm really,
Yeah, I saw.
He's leaving Hodinkee?
I was surprised by that. Yeah, he is.
Yeah.
I was very surprised by that.
think it's a career transition. So I really do wish him, the best of success. And that's really
Oh, wow.
exciting if it's, passion
Yeah.
pursuit.
Yeah.
That's news.
Yeah.
But when you say about you like books with a forensic kind of analysis of watches, have you ever seen some of the Japanese magazines and books?
Oh my gosh, Japanese culture is so cool when it comes to collecting. I don't know anything about the watch scene, but I know that through a few friends of mine online who are hip hop artists and really big Polo Ralph Lauren aficionados, there is so much interesting like kind of collecting cultures in Japan. And I have seen magazines where they have all of these really interesting windbreakers from the early 90s. And I know this, like, and these are curated by enthusiasts. They're not curated by like a retailer, for instance, that has all these things. There's somebody who's a passionate collector. And so if I were to get my hands on some of those from vintage watches, I would be just so thrilled. I just don't know where to search.
Yeah, there's whole magazines which just deal with bracelets.
Yeah. It's insane.
Like the Japanese take it to next level. Yeah.
It's really something to be admired because they're very ahead of the curve when it comes to finding cool things, and oftentimes it's stuff that is years in advance of where we are in the United States. They've caught on to something that's great, maybe if it's streetwear or if it's sneakers, and it's now it's the digital era, right? So there's probably a little bit quicker to pick up on it, but this has been going on much longer than Instagram has. They've got a ferocious collecting community of out there.
Yeah.
And they were one of the first to kind of really announce Philippe Dufour.
Really?
Yeah,
Yes,
because Japanese was the first people to bring up Philippe Dufour and bring attention to it, at least.
Yes, and that's why like a lot of the Dufours, I mean, even now still reside in collections like in Japan, especially their 34 millimeter pieces, like which was the first iteration that Philippe actually wore himself. But oh my gosh, like every time we talk about the collecting culture in Asia, or not even Asia, like in the world, I'm just so amazed by the condition that timepieces are like kept in Japan. You go vintage shopping or just window shopping in Japan, and I'm just amazed by how much people care. And it's not like we don't care in North America, but there's just something different in Japanese culture. Like the attention to detail and the eye for detail. I think it's really like what's the Chinese word, like 比不了, what's 比不了 in English? Like you just can't compare it. You just can't.
Cool.
Because I think it's passed down through history. Yeah, I think it's like, yeah.
I've never actually shopped in Japan, but I've heard friends say, when you do, they're actually, before you even asking, telling you exactly where the problems are with the watch. Like, oh, there might be a ding here, there might be a scratch there, making you aware of it. Well, I would say for a lot of the other dealers, they're like, oh, I hope you don't see it. Like it's seen as it's sold as seen, and all this kind of stuff.
And
it's what I've heard. I don't know. I can't, don't hold me to that, but it's what I've heard.
There's beauty in the imperfections too. Like, I mean, something can have, blemishes on the dial, and that might be one man's garbage is another man's treasure, is the saying, right? And speaking of, the Japanese and Asian interests in collecting, Jacqueline, what you were referring to, I think that you might also find, if you search for these old Habsburg and Feldman catalogs that were auctions being sold in the auctions for the Asian market, you'll find that there's a wide range of awesome Cartiers in these, because in the East, they had a much more appreciation for Cartier than maybe even out in like the West or in Europe. I mean, a lot of these auctions in the 1980s and early 90s, they had these just like tons of lots of incredible Cartiers. And it's just something, another thing that you can kind of hunt for in terms of collecting stuff for your library.
Yeah.
In this interview, we've mentioned basically so far two brands, Patek Philippe and Cartier. Do you think that those brands have the richest history? Or what other brands have such a rich history, do you think, that are worth mentioning?
Yeah, I mean, so in terms of like literature, yes, those two would be the ones that I'd say are kind of, it's hard to make a case against those two. But, I mean, there's brands like Gerard Perregaux, for instance, is a brand that has incredible history, and it just hasn't necessarily, maybe been elevated to the extent that Patek and Cartier have. I mean, people like John Reardon, for instance, I think that like these are people that are just incredible ambassadors of the brand, even though they might not work, directly for the brand, but they're a contributor to the columns in their magazines. I mean, they really, for me, those types of people who really are passionate about a brand or a variety of watches, those are the things that I think end up making a brand more interesting in terms of their history. But I think it's hard to say that there's anyone touching Patek and Cartier in terms of literature. But there's tons of brands. Like I think Volcane is a fantastic brand with interesting history. I mean, really interesting in that one of the preeminent like watchmaking families that is of Jewish descent. Fascinating history in terms of its contribution to, making the first serially produced alarm watches, which are not necessarily cool, but, some people love them. And there's tons of brands. It's just a matter about finding them. One of your past guests, Stephen, he does incredible stuff where he just creates all of this rich like history on a brand I've never even heard of.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's so much out there that has yet to be really brought to all of our attentions, maybe, or it's hard to say. It's endless.
Yeah.
So Charlie was referring to Stephen Foskett, right?
Yes.
Yeah, he's enlightened me. When you think you know something about a certain brand and the story, he's taken it about microscopic. He's taken the microscope to your story and gone like 10 layers deeper, and then you leave it. And many times I was speaking, I was just I was silent.
Yeah.
Because I was like, huh?
He's phenomenal to listen to.
He's a great speaker as well.
Yeah, I mean, he's telling you, he's painting a picture while he's talking about something, and he's not reading off a script. He's kind of freestyling it and telling you about, oh, from this hill over here, you can see the factory, and then and I'm just sitting there like, oh my God, this is like NPR, but for watches. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Which stories do you think have excited you the most that you've read?
Oh, wow. I really like, I was thinking about this the other day. I really love the story of the Dalai Lama's watch. There's an article that Eric Wind had written for Hodinkee, I think probably 2015. It was kind of an expansion on an article that's no longer, I think, online, but John Reardon had initially been talking about this watch, and it was a complicated Patek that was purchased by FDR and then delivered by to I guess kind of like people who were involved in what was I'm blanking on the word, but it was the CIA, but it was essentially the first the faction of what the CIA ended up evolving into. These two individuals went and traced down the Dalai Lama and gave him this watch as a gift from FDR. And that's just, phenomenal story. And eventually the watch ends up being photographed on Facebook, and then people are saying, oh, wow, this is where this watch has been this whole time. And the Dalai Lama is apparently a big watch guy. He likes to work on his Rolex and all this stuff. I mean, That's fascinating. I think there's tons of stories that really appeal to me. A lot of the stories with where watches are located in terms of people looking for these watches that are, I guess, they've never surfaced, or maybe hunting for like the best example. Those are really interesting to listen to, and just conversations with people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned that there's loads of stories, and you're in digital marketing. How do you think, and we don't actually represent any watch companies, now let's just put that disclaimer out there, but what do you think, in your professional opinion, the watch brands do? How well do they do in digital marketing? And do you think that they should actually focus on trying to find a lot of these stories that are in their brand history and heritage more to light?
One of the brands that I think does an awesome job is Audemars Piguet. And I know everybody is kind of like, oh, well, they're just a Royal Oak or whatever. And then, the Code 1159 comes out and everyone roasts them. And then the Black Panther watch. And, so there's a lot of people that are a little bit like, they like to throw stones at AP. And, for me, I think that it's quite an awesome brand in that they highlight in their Instagram stories the women who are the restoration specialists, and you can go on their Instagram and find these really fascinating, elements of what the brand represents and its history and its evolution. And I love the fact that they've got, passionate individuals that are kind of more public facing, like Michael Friedman, and they've invested into this incredible museum, which if I were to choose between like this incredible vintage watch or being able to go to Audemars Piguet's museum right now, I would go to the museum if I had to spend money on it and sit there and marvel over all of this fascinating history. I mean, their book, 20th Century Complicated Wristwatches, I mean, that's a marvelous book from a brand, and they were very transparent in terms of who were the case makers. Okay, so it wasn't necessarily Audemars Piguet making these cases. It was brand like, it was manufacturer Egli and Chi, or who was the complication specialist in this region that was facilitating the movement blanks versus the final product. I think that all of these kind of elements of how they market the brand and the history, that's something that I respect. And I think that, but for, the contrary is, I mean, the counterpoint to this is like, sometimes there's a lot of brand narrative that's not necessarily the most true, or perhaps could, there's some value in having maybe a more enthusiast kind of approach to it, and having somebody from the outside the organization, say, hey, you know what, this is something that probably could be incorporated. I'm sure that there's, tons of opportunity for that. I just don't know if it's being utilized as much for most brands.
Yeah, I mean, again, we said this in the previous podcast. AP, again, independent brand, probably they see the value in that more than the bottom line, that what you see in brands in the conglomerates, right? You've got a lot of people that shifting positions, maybe arguably not staying in the company for any length of time to even be bothered to search for new angles on marketing, right?
Yeah.
And to some extent, like you say, perhaps not even fully understanding the story.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of value in having people that, I mean, look, in life in general, I think it's important to get a variety of people who are going to give you a different kind of vantage point to look at something in, or maybe, tell you the honest truth. It's not necessarily music to your ears, but this happens, I think, in like a lot of the fashion industry, where brands will, and especially nowadays, where they're just grabbing people who are, not necessarily influencers, but they have their own style and their own vision. And then they say, all right, you know what, we're going to listen to this person's, vision, or we're going to appeal to their authority, or maybe ask for their creative input. And to some extent, this is something that, fashion designers were involved a lot in the 70s and the 60s, and the the term fashion watch is kind of something that people frown upon, but there's a lot of incredible fashion watches that are really beautiful, and I think
it's
something that
interesting.
could be.
It's interesting, like the point that I pick up there from you, which is about how fashion brands can work with, well, people in general, right? And see their interpretation of their fashion, their brand, their clothing. It was a point that we discussed personally amongst us three yesterday, in the fact that most of the marketing material does come from the brand now. And the way they have the media, they really control the narrative on that. And the fact that as collectors now, from the top brands, if you want the piece, you also have to play into that narrative and not really have well, maybe a healthy debate, right? I put maybe, not a healthy debate. It's totally opposite, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really into that, scene in terms of like going in and purchasing new watches. I do like some of the new watches a lot. Like, I don't know if this is something that is a constant struggle with people to get access to some of these brands, but like, for instance, like Brew watches, Jonathan out of New York. I think that
I think the new watches he released are great looking watches.
They're phenomenal looking, I think.
Yeah, it reminds me of the Skipper, like the color scheme.
Yes. Yeah. And what's funny is the mono the silver dial one, the monochromatic watch. I thought that one was like, you know what? That's not the one that I like. And then I see it 2 or 3 times this week, and I'm like, oh, you know what? I love that watch. So I think that, I don't even know where the question was. My apologies, Daniel. But I mean, modern watches are great. I don't necessarily know about all of the playing into the games of building relationships with people and in the retail space, but I think that I'll probably, I don't know if this is an effective approach, but I think that there is a human level to a lot of these transactions or purchases that you get with a brand. Maybe it's something where it's difficult to express your interest when there's a million other people that are obsessed with a Royal Oak or a Nautilus, and you're all in the same category. But I think that probably there's some advantage to, speaking with the salesperson or maybe the boutique manager on a personal level and saying, this is something that I really would love, and this is the reason why, outside of, being able to post it on Instagram, or it's just a hot watch, whether that, is something that you have to purchase a million watches or not. I don't like to get into that thought process, but I'd hope that the people who really love those watches end up, eventually getting something like that. That's their dream.
But Dan, I have a question. Like, while we're on this topic, and we were discussing this like privately, I mean, I guess we know of people who have already built relationships with like these really hot brands and are able to get these pieces, right? And when you mean like playing into the narrative, and I understand that, like, because brands, from a brand's perspective, they also want to find customers who fit their image. But then when Charlie, you were talking, right? And I just remembered an interview that I watched with Waco and Austin. And I think Austin was showing him the new like black ceramic open work Royal Oak, the perpetual calendar. And then I can't remember how Wei phrased it, but it was really funny. He was like, okay, not only do you have the non-open worked, but you also have the open worked version, which is what people are like trading their souls and like scheming to get. And he used, I think it was a synonym to like scheme, basically with a plan and doing it purposefully. And then like they were having a laugh at it. So I remember like when I was watching that, right, and I just kept on thinking, yeah, maybe like having a human connection obviously is important, but then from a brand's perspective, like if I were store manager, and all of a sudden like people are really nice to me, like everyone's really nice to me, then how do I decipher which one, like, are you actually nice to me on a human level, or do you just want me to give you a watch? Like that, I think I don't think I'm far reaching there. I think it's like they actually have to think about it, right? Because like why else?
It's important, I think, in life, and I think that it's probably a little bit easier to feel like genuine connections with people when your intentions are very transparent, and you say, you know what, I actually, if you can put me on a waiting list and just keep me in mind, that would be, really appreciated on my end. Like, I think that, that sort of one-on-one and just, being a little bit more down to earth with someone and saying, this is something that I would really love, but I also don't want you to like, get too worked up and think that, oh, you know what, I'm just trying to, kiss your ass or whatever. I think that, when you're genuine with people, sometimes it's for the most part, I think that it's quite easy to see those interactions with people as this person is actually an authentic enthusiast. They're not somebody that's trying to just get this so they can, be the one with the hot watch. But it's one of those things.
Yeah, I have another question though. How when you buy vintage, right? Like say if you were to go to a dealer and then he shows you a tray of vintage watches, and you can actually get into like the nitty-gritty history things. Like, oh my god, like they improved the movement after 2 years, they went from like 18,000 to 21,000. Like you can actually get into the nitty-gritty. But then when you're talking modern, like if you have a genuine interest, say we'll just use the Royal Oak again, right? Say we'll just use the open worked ceramic, black ceramic. Like everyone and their mom knows that it's like one of the hottest watches. And then when you approach someone, like say in the boutique, how do you genuinely show interest in a hot watch? Do you be like, what do you say? I love that it's black ceramic. Like, yeah, of course you do, because like everyone wants it. It's I'm not saying that like, oh yeah, they're saying it because it's like the thing to say, but then I think it's more difficult to show for the people who like really just want it, hype or not. I think it's just really hard for these clients to show like, why do you want it so much? Because it's so hot. You know what I mean? So
there's only X amount of reasons why you would want a watch though. So once you've cycled through all those reasons, there's not much more.
I mean,
right? Love the look of the watch.
Love the look of it.
Design. I love the material. I love open work. I will love perpetual calendar movement. I love the movement. Right? You're not going to say I love the price tag. That's 100%. Right?
The material.
Once you cycle through, everybody's going to say the same thing. And I think if you go to the store, you're just going to say, is there any chance that I could get the open work? Because if you go, I'd like to get the open work, by the way. Have you bought from AP before? No. It strikes like, okay, you're maybe not so experienced with the process, right? For you to ask like that.
I think also like one of the things that might be a little bit different, for at least in my experience, is like when it comes to vintage watches, for me, the materialistic, the acquisition of this thing and saying, oh, I can own this thing, that's not necessarily the priority. Some of these watches, it's just such a privilege to see and appreciate and hold in your hand. And it's just like, wow, this is so incredible. I'm privileged to be able to admire this, like even if it's only for a moment. I've went up to a few of these booths in the Miami Antique Show and just straight up said, hey, I actually don't have anywhere near the budget for that watch, but chances are I'm not going to see this watch ever again. Do you mind if I look at this enameled Rolex? And people react pretty decent towards you when you're a little bit more humble and saying, I can't afford this, but it would be such a privilege to be able to look at this in person. And I think that's what I've really, at least, like, I think I'm fortunate enough to know that, getting all of the watches in life is not going to give me a fulfilled, life. It's just a matter of, do you really appreciate these things? And is the history something that's enthralling to you? Is it a matter of understanding like the condition and being able to say, oh wow, I really like the fact that this is something that's new old stock, and then I love the fact that this is a watch that's beat up and doesn't work, but still, for instance, it looks beautiful in this moment. So there's a lot of depth to this hobby and this appreciation, and hopefully the people that are waiting in lines to get a Nautilus and Royal Oak still have that sort of ground to cover, and hopefully with the right people that are friends to them online or in person, they'll be able to say, let's go and look at something and hang out with somebody that's not a dealer, but they're willing to share.
I guess that really attacks the question that Jacqueline posed a few weeks ago on another podcast, which is the watches you would like to have experience of, or which ones would you actually like to own? And I actually want to touch on that now, which is your watch collection. Right now, I know you're into alarm watches. You kind of hinted about that at the beginning of the podcast. What is it about those that piques your interest? And which ones, when you talk about alarm watches, I'll just put my hand up straight there. I have little knowledge on those. I have friends that have them, and they've played with them and they showed me them, but it hasn't really, when you get excited about something, right? It hasn't hit that note for me. So could you maybe tell me about some of these and which ones are the ones to go for?
Yeah,
I'm always about that. Which ones are the ones to go for?
There's one of your previous guests, James, who was on. He's a fellow watch alarm nut, and I a sidetrack. I really appreciated listening to that episode, because here I am thinking, oh, he's going to talk about crickets and all these quirky things, and I really enjoyed that more one-on-one kind of discussion that was very personal between both of y'all. So that was kind of a great unexpected kind of episode for me. I was actually really excited, the fact that it didn't really revolve around wristwatches instead. But to get back to the question of what it is that appeals to me about alarm watches, I think it's just the fact that they are kind of this quirky complication that if you have an alarm watch and you're in an office with your coworkers, they're going to hate you. They're going to think, oh my God, this guy's so annoying. And I don't necessarily want to be the person that's hated, but I do like, there is some sort of attraction in my eyes to these watches that aren't necessarily the most in vogue. And alarm watches have like just this really interesting place in the 20th century, where these things just came up, and it was really difficult for people to get a functioning alarm watch that you could hear. They started off with a few of them. I think Eterna was one of the original ones, but didn't necessarily have the volume. And eventually in the late 40s, this fellow by the name of Robert Diedesheim, he ended up kind of perfecting this Vulcain cricket alarm watch. And I think that there's just this really great kind of chapter of wristwatches that had a very short-lived kind of, pop. They were really popular in the United States. I mean, there's tons of Vulcains that came through the United States. And even with the Jaeger-LeCoultre Memovoxes and these Wittenauers, there's just so much interesting things. And I think that for me, it's also got kind of an interesting, it's an interesting history, in that these complications aren't necessarily practical by today's standards, but they are almost, they're almost got this little quirky, nerdy aspect, similar to what like a bowl of Accutron offers. They really, for me, they kind of speak to the person who's collecting these things, and they say, oh, this is somebody who's got their own kind of path, and they're obsessed for the right reasons. And I'm not trying to toot my own horn. I'm just saying in general, this is the way I see someone who's got a Memovox on or somebody who's got a Cricut on, I say, oh, you're in my club. We're both nerds.
But I
Yeah.
don't think, if you're in the office being I don't think you'd be the most hated person, but I think you really set yourself up for not being late to anything. Like if you're late,
Yeah.
everybody's like, why are you late?
You have no
you got an
excuse.
alarm. Yeah, you got an alarm watch, man. Like every time you're just going to hear that like attack, and with office politics as bad as they are, and you just don't want another weapon. You don't want your watch weaponized against you.
You don't
right?
want to dig your own grave.
Yeah, dig your own grave. You go around one office, I've got this alarm watch, listen to this. Next day, they're going to be like, well, why are you late then?
Yeah. But then,
Danielle,
Charlie, you always say like, oh, it's not a really useful complication. But name me a complication that is useful. Like,
What's that?
Yeah.
Well,
yeah. I think that,
Like-
usefulness in the sense of like, if I want to wake up in the morning, my alarm watch can't do that. But, my annoying bedside clock is much more effective in that manner. And yeah, I think that, people, for the most part, these complications that we use, I do use my alarm watches frequently. And they're really actually quite interesting in that, like, each one of these Crickets, like, even if it's the same reference, they might have a different sound or what I like to call voice, they have a different tone. Some of them, are brighter than others. Some of them are louder than others. Some of them, ring longer. And it's just this extra kind of like aspect to the watch that is charming in that sense, because we look at a lot of these watches on face value and say, what does it look like? What is the condition? All this stuff. And the fact that these watches have a voice is kind of a cool element to them.
Before we finish off this personal interview with you, I do want to mention that you actually contribute articles to Restatement and have also done for Collectability. What is it about these two platforms that you think is different to the rest? Yeah. So
I've been a big fan of Tony for the last few years, I'd say probably the last 2 years. And Tony is a gentleman who runs site Restatement, and it's a weekly newsletter and very much kind of an enthusiast kind of approach. He will talk about things ranging from auctions, vintage watch kind of deep dives, maybe something within a collector that he interacted with, and showing some of the stuff that, like, oh, this is someone I just came across recently and they're in my city. But Tony's just a guy that I really appreciate in terms of he's always been a really genuine and kind individual, and he's offered to give me kind of a space where I can write about stuff that I'm passionate about with a lot of liberty. And, those types of one-on-one interactions with people, when it's not like, I want to, use your platform for my own benefit, but more so like, hey, you know what, I actually would love to get creative. And this is something that makes me feel fulfilled. And I think that those types of, gestures where people give you their space to, have voice is really something that I appreciate. And the same, with John, for instance, John and Tanya, his partner. I mean, they're just incredible, so much more knowledgeable about Patek Philippe than I'll ever be. But, the fact that I got to write a few articles for their website on things that I was really eager to learn about, and they were able to give me, space to write about jump hour wristwatches from Patek Philippe or solar desktop timepieces. And I mean, these are just really fun things for me. And I need to, speaking of which, I need to revisit John and tell him I need to write another article for Collectability, because it's been a while. But
do you have a topic in mind?
I have a lot of topics actually I should be approaching. But I think that I would love to do something like maybe on case makers. I find that to be fascinating. Maybe a challenging subject also would be cool, like something that I am not comfortable with. That's a fun thing to do as well. When I read the Solar Timepieces article. I mean, I couldn't tell you what photoelectronic energy was, and then I'm sitting there getting obsessed, and before you know it, I'm writing something that's really interesting and researching something that's really interesting. And so I think that as far as the topic, I have a few. Maybe it would be something fun like the evolution of the Calatrava, or maybe deep dive into some of these Calatravas that are they're odd steel ones. You got a recent watch with the Arabic 12 numeral and the steel long lugs that I think was really cool. I don't know what the reference is there.
2584 in white gold.
Oh, I thought it was a steel.
Yeah, it's white gold with the Art Deco PP crown.
Oh, cool.
It resembled it looked like the 3417 3417 AMAG.
Yes.
But then obviously like without the AMAG signature, and that one is manual. This is automatic. Is it 3417 manual or?
Oh yeah.
I think it is, yeah. And this one is automatic. But what really like I love Calatravas because I feel like you can't beat like a simple time only.
Well, it's a classic design, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, when we talk about Swatch, the advent of Swatch, sorry to cut you up, but they based that design on a Calatrava, right?
Yeah.
Because it was such a classic, successful design.
Yeah.
So you just can't go wrong, really.
What's your dream Calatrava, Jacqueline?
Is this your reverse around question?
Oh shoot, yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, let's go straight into the reverse around since you're asking us now. Is that can be Jack's question, or have you got a better one?
Well, no. I was going to jump away from watches for her question.
Okay, I'll just answer. I'll just answer the question right now. I think it's the 570 in do you know the one that Philips sold with the gilt silver brigade numerals and the black dial? Was it the 570 that sold for like how many $2 million? I forget. But that one is beautiful. And then so simple, so classy. But then, Charlie, like my favorite, so I guess like if I had to choose, that's like on the top of my head, but there's so many like beautiful 565s, and even like 96 sector dials are beautiful. And then going back to the 2584, like that, I'm glad that you can appreciate the lug design and the case design, because I bought that from like an auction, so I didn't know how it would fit me, and it took some time to get used to it. But after that, and then especially from the side profile, it's not like any other watch that I've owned before, like how the watch sits because of the lugs.
It's got
like
legs.
It's like okay, at the top of my head I can't think of a better like analogy, but it looks like a little miniature temple, because it has the legs that supports the case, but then there's also no gaps in between. It's just like right on top of your wrist. So and then when I was watching an interview with John Goldberger, you know how he has the 3449, like one of three. It's the exact same case design as that, with the triple lug and the triple step
Visco Volante
and the lug. I thought, how cool is that? Anyways,
so great.
Yeah. Anyways, reverse around.
You know what you should get into is the I can't think of the reference off the top of my head, but it's got the scroll lugs that are kind of resemblance of ionic orders. It's just such a beautiful design. The scroll lugs, it's reference 15 something, but those are beautiful as well.
Scroll lugs.
Yes.
Is it a chronograph?
Nope, time only. Henry Graves had one as well.
Oh, okay. Okay.
All right, talk about upselling. Geez.
Yeah.
Calm down.
It's the 1491.
Okay.
But I'll send you a photo of it. Reverse around.
Okay.
So do I question all of you, or is everybody throwing questions around?
No, it's just you.
Okay, all right. So, Jacqueline, what's your favorite sneaker?
Like ever, or that I own, or what?
Something that you want to rock on a daily basis and can kick around and not worry.
On a daily basis.
Crocs. She's really into Crocs.
Okay, I'm gonna have to say Nike SB Dunk
Yeah.
Low. It's where I started with my sneaker obsession. At one point I owned, and this is not to like toot my own horn, but because back then like they're very easy to find, but I owned some really great Nike SBs, man. Like I've owned the City Pack, I've owned the Lobster Pack, I've owned the Baby Bears, the Gibson guitar with the the pink like velvet lining to resemble the lining of a guitar case. I've owned the pigeons, like the purple pigeons. Man, if I were to choose, probably the pigeons. I still have it. I remember I bought that watch on eBay from a seller in Japan. And this is again, guys,
The
going
sneakers,
back to,
you mean?
Sneakers, not the watch.
what, the pigeons?
Yeah, but you said I bought that watch.
Oh, that's what you call a Freudian slip. I bought that sneaker from a seller in Japan on eBay, and going back to the watch talk discussion about buying watches in Japan, and it came with the original purple pigeon patches. For maybe like 0 of you who are listening who know what that is, I'll just try to briefly explain. It's basically like Nike SB became really big when it came out with the City Pack. It was Tokyo, London, Paris, and New York. And for the Dunk Low for New York, it was designed by Jeff Staples, and it had the New York little pigeon at the back heel of the shoe to resemble, because New York is such a pigeon city. So when that released, there were like 200 pairs, and people literally were killed trying to get this shoe by lining up outside. So it became this huge thing. And then a couple of years later, because that was silver boxes or pink box, I forget. But then years later, Nike SB released the black box series, and then one of them was a purple pigeon. I mean, people started calling it purple pigeon because it was gray and purple, which are the 2 main colors of pigeon. So then they were like, okay, we couldn't get the actual New York pigeons, but this kind of is like similar. It just doesn't have the orange lining. So why don't we like create a pigeon patch that you can literally like stick onto the back heel of your of your shoe that resembles the New York pigeon. So then they made like, I don't think it was ever official, but then people actually started making them, and then I found one with the purple pigeon patch, and I stuck on it, and then I still have it. It's like one of my favorites. I don't wear it anymore, but gosh, how old was I when I bought that? I was like 12, so like more than 10 years ago when I got that, and I still have it. So yeah, I'll just say any Nike SBs to rock, because they're just so comfortable. Yeah.
Lung, who's your favorite artist? Any medium.
I want to say
It could be a designer.
Could be a designer. It could be Jason Wu. He has some cool dresses.
oh man, let me think. I want to say I have more respect for, this is so unfair though. I want to say I have more respect for music artists, because I feel like you have to write not just the lyrics, but then produce the soundtrack. This is not applicable to like all of them, but the ones who I think are like epic are like, you write the music, you write the lyrics, and you basically like create your own career.
Because like Sheeran or something.
Jay Chow.
No,
Jay Chow doesn't write the lyrics.
Okay, you know how I have a lot of respect for people who rewrite their lives, like that come from nothing and then they change their lives. So I always think about rappers, because I think given the circumstance that you grew up in a neighborhood that had everything against you, you had to beat that first. And then you had to everyone has that same like very classic story, like there's guns, violence, and everything.
Yeah.
So how do you still write songs that make you different? And then how do you, because I would imagine that in that industry is a lot of backstabbing, because they're probably trying to promote, like they probably bank on like 50 new rappers, and then we only see one or two that come out. So in between that time, like how much EQ do you have to beat those people, without like physically killing them, right?
But also
Yeah.
like in the music
Yeah.
industry, and this is something I
Yeah.
noticed recently. I started like watching
Mhm.
really old music videos. And do you know the song that Iggy Azalea and Rita Ora released called
Yeah.
Black Widow? And it
Yeah.
was so hot, right?
Yeah.
And then only recently realized that the
Yeah.
song was written by Katy Perry. But
What?
Really?
yes, yes.
Okay.
Did you guys know that? No,
No.
exactly. Like if you actually like dig in, like some of the really popular songs by artists, like they're not written by those artists, they're written by someone else.
Yeah.
Like Ed Sheeran famously wrote so many songs for other artists, but he never really talks about them. And it wasn't until like some radio host brought it up and, oh, you wrote Love Yourself, why did you give it to Justin Bieber? And like these people are so talented, or maybe because they write so many songs, they don't really
Mhm.
care.
Mhm. Mhm.
But yeah, I can't help but think, your song became such a global hit, and it
Mhm.
could have been yours, but you don't know like if if artist A actually gave it to artist B, or maybe
Mhm.
something happened in between. Yeah.
No,
Sometimes
but I
it's
think, yeah.
go for it.
I think like the best people in every field, right, are people who can let go. So even if you're like a TV host, right, it's like when you know your place, like that okay, your time is up and it's time to like pass it on to the next person, and you leave like gracefully. So I think with artists it's the same. When you hear something and you write something or you create something and you're like, okay, this would be better on someone else, you have that heart and grace to be like, here, someone else should do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But then when you're talking about
Yeah.
TV show hosts, oh my God. Do you guys remember the scandal that Alan went through like at the beginning of last year?
I don't actually understand what happened. I watched
Mm.
all the YouTube stuff on it. I can't find
Yeah.
anything that it
Yeah.
makes me go, oh,
Okay. So
yeah.
are you aware of this, Charlie?
Apparently she wasn't necessarily the nicest.
What she perceived. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've always I watch Ellen, like I learned English. It was one of the shows I learned English through. Like it was SpongeBob, some like Nicotone, and then Ellen, and then like, Jimmy, not even Jimmy, Conan O'Brien. And then so I remember watching Justin Bieber because it was like his first talk show that he went on in the US, and that's how I knew of Ellen. But then throughout the years, I started to notice like her reaction to what guests were saying. Like you can tell if you watch enough of her videos that she has a pretty big ego, and she likes being praised. And sometimes when she is praising other people, she you know how if you're really good at even like hiding your feelings or whatever, you make direct eye contact, but when she's trying to think of something nice to say or whatever, like she doesn't look at the guest, she looks at their hands, she looks at her hands, she looks somewhere else, and then she quickly like say, oh, I really loved your character in ABC, she would do this, and then the other guest would be, oh yeah, like this, oh thank you so much, and then even without the guest has said thank you, like she moves on. But tell me about, so like she quickly moves on. Maybe it's just me, but I do notice it's something that she usually does. And then she like would bring her guests onto topics that doesn't really make them comfortable. Like she would purposefully, jokingly say like, oh, why didn't you invite me to this party, why didn't you invite me to that party? And then during this whole thing, like her guests called her out. There's like a video on YouTube saying like celebrities not giving giving zero fucks to Ellen, or like calling Ellen out. I think Dakota Johnson called Ellen out on how she said Dakota never invited her to her birthday party. And then Dakota right away said, no, Ellen, that's not true. Check with your producer. You were invited. And then Ellen, during the recording, like show, there's the audience, right? Asked the producer, where was I that weekend? Was I invited? Oh, I was out of town. Like that. And then everyone started laughing. But then yeah, it was apparently a big deal. And then obviously her employees came out on Twitter and called people. Well, anyways, why are we talking about this?
Yeah, I mean, what I would say, like, I can paraphrase what Jacqueline has said. I would say I agree with Long. I also watched a bit of stuff, and I just didn't really get what all the furore and the upset was about. I just thought that for the most part, Ellen can come across as quite sarcastic, and if you don't get sarcasm, sometimes you think like it's quite mean. Right.
Yeah.
Okay,
then,
yeah. I think it is the sarcasm.
Sarcasm
then,
doesn't always work. You need a bit of intelligence. I'm not saying the audience is not intelligent, but you need to pick it up. That's number one. Number two,
timing.
It's not appropriate for all guests. All guests don't like that. Like, so some guests will get it, some people won't get it, and I think with Dakota, I didn't think she was going to toe with Ellen. I just thought
she
that
wasn't.
She was
playing it off. Yeah, she was.
But
then there's this YouTuber called Nikki Tutorials who's a transgender.
I realized me and Jacqueline watch a lot of trans people on YouTube, like Nikki, and then the other one,
Jeffrey.
The one with the pink car. Yeah, Jeffree Star.
Wait, so when you transition from male to female, are you a trans woman or a trans man? Trans woman, right?
I think that it
trans
is
woman
based on. I think it's based on what you identify as. So the gender is.
Yeah,
is
she identifies
included.
as a girl, so she's a trans woman. And then when Ellen invited her on to the show, and then Nikki made this like YouTube tutorial saying how she, like before she went on to the show, Ellen didn't even really like introduce herself or whatever. And then as soon as she went on to the show, like Ellen was very warm and yeah. And then, but I think what really broke her was how her employees were coming up to tell about like how we were being mistreated. I think that was the biggest news of all. Like celebrities, people didn't care as much. It was her like employees, her own employees.
Hang on. Like, what's the actual answer? Did Long give anyway?
Oh, like, sorry. Okay, so let me just because there's
music,
so many
rappers.
Let me just.
I don't want the podcast totally like saturated with Ellen content. You know,
Ellen is so good that Ellen's the best.
We don't need to give her any more promo.
But she does have an epic like watch collection though.
She does.
Like one of my dream watch collections. Okay, top of my head, Jacqueline, do you know Mary J. Blige though? Because it's like way before you. Yeah. So if you and Mary J. Blige, like to me, she's like one of the OGs, and then she kind of like paved the way for a lot of female rappers and R&B singers. So she was one of those people. I think to have longevity, you have to think like way ahead of time, like what's going to happen to me when it's all over. Because I think the newer ones that like Britney and everyone, there's already a set path. Like when you're done, you go to Vegas and you do your show, right? But back then it was like, how do you actually have enough wealth so it sustains you and you don't just like waste all your money away?
What about Rihanna?
How do you stay? Rihanna. Rihanna, yeah. So they fall into that new category, which is
I was just saying, I agree with Long. Yeah.
You're packaged, and then suddenly you become a slut. Okay, so you're like innocent first, and then you're a slut, and then the next part is story of my life, and then the next part is they do makeup brands, right? Yeah. And then they go into fashion, and then she went into lingerie. Makeup. Yeah, so there's a package and there's a route.
Well, I think when Charlie asked the question, two people came to mind. One, when Long talked about rappers, my immediate thing was actually Eminem, because like in a black society, with basically black music, he was the one. He must have had even more difficulty getting to where he was. That's number one. And then the second guy I actually thought of, which isn't into music, as Dave Chappelle. You know.
Yeah.
From what he did,
epic.
He's epic. From what he did for comedy, it's quite hard to surpass.
And still does for comedy as well.
Yeah, what he does for comedy, what he did for comedy, how he stood up for comedy. You know, That guy's
His
a bit of a
name
legend,
sounds
man.
so familiar, but
This is
I
Dave
You
Chappelle
have
show.
to you have to watch him.
Right,
He
right.
is
Oh my
he
gosh,
is
how do you
like
not know?
No,
yeah, he
Dave
makes
Chappelle.
like
I've heard of his name before many times, but I've never really.
Go on
he makes
Netflix immediately.
yeah.
So that's the kind
He
of guy
makes
I thought
yeah.
of. Yeah, when Charlie asked the question. Yeah.
Lung Lung, when you
Yeah.
mentioned Mary J. Blige, I was reminded of one of my favorite songs by Ghostface Killah and Mary J. Blige. She sings the chorus, and it's a song called "All That I've Got Is You," and
Yeah.
it's a
Can
really
you
beautiful one.
can you sing some of that?
Not as well as her, but I could definitely. I mean, this is a song. I mean, I've cried to this, and there's very few hip hop songs that I think are tear jerkers. But Ghostface Killah's song with Mary J. Blige is a beautiful one. I would definitely encourage anybody out there who likes either of those two artists to check it out.
I kind of want to know because I'm like Oprah's second biggest fan. Because I want
Who's
to see
the
someone in
first?
someone in the US and get like someone that's like crazy, right?
Actually,
Okay,
Oprah.
I am Oprah's biggest fan in Asia then. Okay. I want to
You
know
actually
like
are. You've brought up Oprah so many times.
I love Oprah, okay? Like I read her books from like Oprah's book club. Like who even does that?
Yeah.
Like who's even in her book club anyways? I want to know who you think is genuine, like on TV, a TV host.
Me?
Oh my God.
Yeah,
Who
like
I think.
all you guys, yeah.
I don't watch too much television, but I think that somebody that I really enjoy right now is Hamilton Morris, and he's a gentleman who has a show on I think HBO or Hulu, and it's about him basically going out and researching psychedelic drugs all over the planet. So I think that one of the interesting things that he was doing the other day, and this is by no means an endorsement for any kids listening, don't do drugs, but I mean, he's just a fascinating character who goes in and basically does these incredible like breakdowns on his television show of what the chemical is made up of, or what the reaction of smoking toad venom is, and then he goes in and meets up with interesting I think botanists in Thailand who grow these beautiful cactuses that produce peyote, and he's asking this gentleman, he's like, does any of your clients use drugs for these cactuses? And no, these things cost $10,000 just to have in your home, and these beautiful plants that produce psychedelic or hallucinogenic drugs or whatever. And I guess nobody does them outside of the United States apparently, but that's where they're illegal. But I don't know, I think that's an individual who I find to be really interesting and genuine, and it's not necessarily a show where he's like advocating for drug use, but more so just really exploring these topics that are quite fascinating. Yeah,
Well,
Hamilton Morris on Hulu.
I'm based in China, and I don't think any of the hosts are genuine. So commercially based. If I had to just pick one off the top of my head, and again, I'm a bit like you, Charlie, I don't watch that much TV. I would say out of the shows I watch, I quite like Graham Norton in the UK. I just find him quite sincere, quite polite. He gets, like many of the chat shows, he gets a lot of the guests onto the show, and I can see it just seems very natural. Everything seems very genuine. Even the interaction between the guests.
I think it's just because of British humor. Like a lot of the things that I also watch a lot of Graham Norton. I wouldn't say he's like the most polite.
Yeah, you have to imagine him off camera.
Yeah, I wouldn't say he's like the most polite, but he's very smart with his words. And I think like he gets away with some of the jokes that he makes that might be deemed as rude in North America, but then because it's like the UK, and I think the funniest interviews that he does are like there are 4 people on the couch, 3 of them are Brits and there's 1 American, and then you can see like the Brits talking amongst themselves, and then there's just like a dungeon in between the American and the British people, and it's really funny. But yeah, Graham Norton is a great host. I love his accent too.
I think it's probably like you say, a British thing, because
Yeah, but
I would
love
say
British humor
in North America, I think I'd be pretty rude. Like I could definitely be taken across as rude and blunt.
Yeah, I think it's just
because
it's
you know
culture
I'm
thing.
like, I'm pretty sarcastic. I'm pretty blunt instrument, no refinement at all.
I think,
But yeah, let's wrap up your answer. Like,
Wait, can I just
Jack?
say Hamilton Morris? I think he was
Morris?
on Vice, and I watched it. You have to watch this. Just
I
like Google.
was going to say Vice.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, okay,
Yeah.
when you asked that question,
Okay.
Charlie, the
Yeah.
people who first came to mind was like, okay, no American talk show hosts, because they're all fake as hell.
Yeah.
And then I went into like documentary, so I was gonna say like BBC and Vice.
Vice is an
Animal
interesting
Planet.
Yeah. Vice
Yeah.
is good.
Yeah.
Also, you know who else I feel is like is genuine. I don't know if anybody else feels this way. Maybe not. I'm not really sure. I haven't really ever had this conversation with anybody about him, but Kevin Hart strikes me as a pretty genuine individual.
Yeah.
And I also really liked his approach, where he ended up getting arrested for a DUI, and the next morning when paparazzis came and saw him outside of the police precinct where he had made bail the next morning, and he just basically was walking to his car, and he said, you know what, I was out of line. I got resisting arrest charges because I was upset and a little bit intoxicated, and I'm gonna have to own up to that. And he basically it wasn't anything rehearsed or anything like that. It was just maybe, spur of the moment, kind of coming to the realization of, I behaved stupidly last night, and I have to own up to it. So I thought that was a really interesting thing that I saw him do. And I always have been kind of a big Kevin Hart fan.
He has a good new talk show now called Heart to Heart.
I haven't seen it yet. I should.
It's really good.
I think a lot of motivational things that he talks about, especially after he went through that health scare, like surgery thing.
I loved his book. He wrote about his upbringing and being raised by his mother, and his mother's insistency that when he starts something that he has to finish it. And he became like a really a highly decorated freestyle swimmer, and he's a black kid in Philadelphia, which if for the most part, I don't think that's really a big swimming state, but he ended up being a very high level competitor, and a lot of the things when we were in the YMCA, when we were lifeguards, we were told you have to be very vigilant about watching the children, and a lot of times some of the children who are black kids, they didn't necessarily have the strongest swimming skills. And this was 10 years ago. So, I mean, maybe things have changed since I was a summer camp counselor, but, I always thought that was a really interesting one. And I think he's also kind of alluded to the fact that the sport that he was playing was, just so random for what, was expected, I guess. I love Kevin.
Right. So I think, Jack, you've yet to answer. Have you answered yours?
I think, off the top of my head, I have a lot of respect for actors who go through like extreme physical transformations to fit their characters.
Like Christian Bale.
Wait, don't you love Justin Bieber? Honestly.
Yes. But I
thought you were asking me. Sorry.
Favorite. I think I have like really immense respect for people who do that to like fit a character. So yes, Christian Bale is one, and then I guess like Chris Hemsworth is another, because obviously like you say Chris Hemsworth and then it's like Thor, whatever, but then when he did that like not cannibal But it involved cannibalism, like as the movie plot, like they were shipwrecked, and then he actually had to
gosh.
starve himself. Yeah. And then yeah, so actors who do that. um who else do I Okay, people are gonna laugh by this answer, but like in terms of music, you know how like K-pop is really hot right now, and then everyone's like, yeah, K-pop, like, oh my god, they're so hot or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
But um if you actually like look through just how much training these really just kids go through at such a
Yeah, I
young
would say it's
age.
more abuse.
Yes,
Oh,
yes,
shame.
it's like physical and
Physical,
and
mental
mental, like
abuse.
brainwash.
Yeah.
It's I don't want to say incredible, but I also don't want to say like, okay, I'm neutral about it, but I'm neutral about it, but then just I don't think I can go through that. And at such a young age, they get put through so much pressure. And then if they are successful, which is, maybe like 1 or 2% of the people who try out or whatever, then they get under so much scrutiny by fans and whatnot. And, you know, you can only be in this industry like as a band for maybe, if you're lucky, like 10 years, and then you're deemed too old to be in a band, in a K-pop band. And then like that's basically like the height of your life career wise, right, as a K-pop star. um so basically they go through so much at such a young age. They live and then they go up to such a height, and then they maybe like go down, um because
Shame.
because there's so many K-pop bands that are coming out every year, like every year. So I also, again, I have respect for these people who are just, I don't think I can ever do what they do. But I think also people see K-pop as just like the newest thing, but it actually is fascinating when you look behind just how much hard work and, like Dan said, abuse that they're put through at such a young age. Yeah.
Right, Charlie. You're on to me now. Last question for the reverse round.
Okay.
That was almost a podcast in itself.
I mean, what was your
Oh, you've got a selection.
what is because you're a big reader, what's the book that was the most influential on you, or the author or book that's been the most influential on you?
This is a whole different podcast again, just on books. It would just like
We can trim
Also,
it. Who cares? Like, we're getting to know each other.
Can you repeat the question again?
Yeah, sure. So, being that you're an avid reader, what is either a book or an author that has had a profound impact on you?
Oh, God.
Why?
There's been so many, right? Because I made it my mission this year to read 52 books. Probably like we're in August now and I'm up to 30. So I'm slightly behind schedule. It's very difficult to answer just one book. Am I only allowed just one book?
You can have multiple books if
Okay,
you want.
all right. I would say I really liked this book called Pachinko. I can't remember who the author is. I'll find out. It's a fiction book, right? And it spans over basically 4 generations of Korean family during the wartime and how they had to relocate to Japan and then set up life in Japan and eventually did quite well for themselves. But it really documents the human sacrifice that was happening at that time. And I think why I like that book is I think it's really well researched. It's literally a story with no like you do get highs and lows, but it isn't like, you never think it has like a beginning, middle, and end, kind of speak. It just finishes. And I could just think that, oh yeah, it's fiction, but that story could have applied very successfully in a non-fiction setting, as in this would have happened to someone. It's just that this story wasn't told, right? And that had a very profound impact on like my feeling of the human spirit. So that was definitely, I thought, a very strong book. I think it's very hard for me to go past the book called Quiet by Susan Cain. This was the first book out of the basically 52 that I read. And it always has a special connection because of Long Long, you know. So Long Long, basically, people don't probably know that she got me into reading, actually, right? And it was my desire to understand her better, right, on a friendship level, to understand what was going in her mind, that really kickstarted it, right? So I read that book. I got a far better understanding of my friend, which I'm really grateful for. And it just increased that connection and then kickstarted my reading thing. I hadn't decided that I was going to read X amount of books until after that book. So that's quite a special book. And then I think more recently, I'll just mention two more books. One is actually, I really love the Cartier book.
Franco Coloni.
Yeah, no, the Brickwell. Francesca, yeah.
Oh my gosh, she's so amazing.
It's amazing, like that with the book that has been, the way that's been written. So it's a total, like I said to Long Long, it's a non-fiction written in a fiction kind of way, but it really deals with, again, going past generations. So maybe there's something in it about generations that really resonates with me, and how that wealth was passed on, and then what ultimately, you know, caused it, you know, Cartier to be sold, right? And the tensions between families and stuff like that. It gave me a very good insight on maybe what it takes to pass down certain values across generations. Very difficult to do. So that one. And then I've just finished Range, which I think you'll see this everywhere in all the book clubs right now. It's super hot. And a lot, you know, I will say in a lot of these book clubs, right, a lot of these books are misses, you know, like it's clearly a marketing tool. But with this Range, I think it really does deserve its place, because especially in Asian culture, and I would say even, you know, we have this now, China and its philosophy is becoming a bit of a product globally, and how, you know, like say, just like Tiger Mums, how we force children to do this, really excel, and what we think get ahead in life, and we forget, like, you know, maybe it's beneficial just to do some exploration first. You know, a lot of the success stories we hear, whether it's Tiger Woods or like other young geniuses, they never become geniuses. They never make it, right? Despite all that training. What we hear is just a few select people. And I love the beginning of that book, how it compares Tiger Woods and Roger Federer. Just read the first chapter of that book and you'd be like, because everybody can identify with those two people, right? Because they're so famous. And they're on equal par as well, I would say, in terms of what they've achieved in the sport. So you see how Roger Federer kind of developed, and then how Tiger Woods developed. You kind of think, you know, I love these books which question what we believe in society as the right thing to do, and that we commonly almost accept without question anymore. And these people put a question mark and basically just maintain our bandwidth on thought. That I think is really critical. And I love the examples that book gives across industries on where having range really, really helps, right? So you don't have to identify with all of the whole book, but there are going to be some key examples which you will definitely identify and definitely stick. And it even put a question mark on how I would behave. So I love that in the, you know, because you think like, okay, you somehow opening your mind up, right? Like I've always thought, you know, being like dedicated, single track hitting things, but then, you know, having a broader perspective, getting a wider range of skills is actually maybe the way to go. It's all a balance, I guess, in the end. But yeah, those books are the ones I would recommend. Yeah. But yeah, Quiet, Susan Cain always has a special place in my heart, just because of the attachment with a certain long term. Yeah.
But when you, like Charlie, going back to the genuine people, right? I always just thought Roger Federer, every time I watch his interviews, he comes off as a very genuine person. or actually a lot of athletes do.
Yeah, it even actually the first chapter even goes on about that, because it even
Really?
says like, yeah, how Tiger Woods got all that media training,
Oh,
yeah, and how Roger Federer didn't, yeah, and yeah, it goes in really quite deep on those two characters. I don't want to
Yeah.
spoil it, but it's like that first chapter just goes boom, hit me, and I thought, okay, I need to read this book. Yeah. So right, so now we go on to the pump push around. Right.
Gosh.
So tell me something about furniture that can make me sound kind of like I know what I'm talking about.
Oh my goodness. Tell you something about furniture.
Like a term, maybe.
Oh my goodness. Furniture.
That was actually what I wanted to ask, like all the way in the beginning. Like, I just need, you know, how with watches you can be like provenance and you sound fancy. So like what is a word for like the leg of a chair that I can just be like a wood grain or something?
Oh my goodness. I have no idea the terminology on furniture. Goodness. Daniel, I'm blanking
Okay,
right now.
we will give that one a miss. Number 2, which is the watch you want most right now?
Oh, goodness.
And by the way, if your dad listens to the podcast, I think he'd be very disappointed that you didn't get that on the first one.
I know he will be so disheartened. He'll
all those years of trudging you around gone to waste.
All right. So the watch that I want the most right now, I think that right now in my life, I've kind of really come to a place of where I appreciate what I have. I have all the watches that realistically all of us we're all spoiled rotten when it comes to watches, I think. And I love the watches that I have. If I were to look at it and say like, okay, you can't, these watches won't be with me forever. One day, the watches are gone. Everything comes to an end and you don't get to enjoy these watches for eternity. But I think that what I have right now is I'm very blessed and I'm fortunate to have, things that I really love and appreciate, and to be, not, a little bit avoiding of the question, the watch that I would love to maybe own one day, or at least, get to enjoy. I'd like a proper Memovox, a small one from the 50s maybe, or I'd love to see a pink rose gold 1518 with a rose gold dial, or pink gold. That'd be so cool. There's only like 9 or 10 or something like that. I'd love to see, a Wittenauer alarm watch. That'd be really cool too. But at the end of the day, I've got everything that I need.
Okay.
Happy.
The next question is kind of like flipped onto you, because I actually also asked, name a book that we should read that isn't a watch book.
Ooh, a book that you should read that isn't a watch book. The Holy Bible.
All he can think of is
The Holy Bible. Okay.
The Holy Bible.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bit of a cop out, but I'll take
No.
it.
How about this? How about
The dictionary. Wikipedia.
Artful Partners?
Artful Partners?
Yes, that's a book that I picked up about 3 months ago and began. And it is about, I didn't get more than about 50 pages in, and then I set it down and didn't get back to it. But it's about 2 individuals, one of which is a prominent art collector and one is a prominent art dealer. And apparently these 2 were in cahoots and were able to amass a fortune, being, or I guess, manufacturing a relationship and enhancing the value of the art that they ended up trading in.
I thought, okay, that just reminded me of this documentary I watched. It was also 2 people. One is an art dealer and one is a counterfeit artist. And how they were able to amass such a fortune by selling fake paintings around, I think, Europe in like the early 20th century.
The interesting recommendation, considering you didn't finish the book.
Oh,
Like-
I picked it back up about 3 days ago because I saw it. I saw it on my coffee table downstairs, and I said, Charlie, you need to read this book. So I ended up having it there, and I've restarted it. I think that it's a fascinating book. I just haven't gotten past, I haven't made any progress in it, unfortunately, because I've been so preoccupied trying to write and
Okay.
do work and crap. I should really spend more time on that.
Right. Next one. One thing that we should eat from your hometown,
Oh my gosh.
which I don't even know where it is. Like, where is your hometown and what should we eat?
St. Augustine, Florida. You got to go to Hazel's Hot Dogs. Yeah, no, that's the worst. That's terrible.
So
I'd
American.
say, goodness. I would say, how about Everything Bagel? They have some of the best bagels.
Right. We
on
will
the
not
planet.
get long away from that store.
That
Like,
is the breakfast
she
spot.
would just be there, right? Morning, breakfast, like lunch, all the way through, right? Just scoffing bagels.
It's not a bad
Oh,
place to live.
God. Right. Okay. Next one. One piece of advice your father has given you that you have found particularly useful can be life or collecting.
Be empathetical.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good advice.
Right. He's a good person, and that's the one thing that I always try to remind myself of every day. Just try to be empathetical.
Okay. Next one. One thing you do on the weekend that you don't do during the week.
Go to the coffee shops.
Huh?
Go to the coffee shops.
You don't go for coffee like during the week?
Nope, I drink
Oh, you
coffee
do.
at home.
Okay.
Drink coffee at home, but then on the weekends I go to a few different local coffee shops, and I bring my big old watch books and put finger smudges and all that junk in them.
Right. And the last one, what's the one thing you want to do before you die?
Oh wow.
Oh, so
Oh,
heavy.
Live.
Okay.
Yes. Amen to that.
Right. Well, that ends the podcast, and quite aptly. Thank you for everybody for putting up with us during that podcast. If you want to connect with Charlie, you can connect with him on Instagram via @books_on_time. That's books_on_time. And then obviously, if you want to reach out to us and shoot some ball, then you can also find us at A Dose of Time, which is Jacqueline, Long Lantern, and Mr. Daniel Sum. Okay, we'll see you guys on the next one. Thank you for tuning in to the Waiting List podcast. Hit the subscribe button, and the next episode will come straight to your phone as soon as it's ready. Whilst I'm here, please remember to leave a nice review and follow us on Instagram @The Waiting List Podcast.